The time has come for the Shadow Victreebel PvP IV Deep Dive. The PvP IV Deep Dive that nobody asked for, but here we are. So why are we talking about Shadow Victreebel? Well, you might not know it, but Shadow Victreebel is actually the most farmable Shadow Pokemon in the game. So if there is any Shadow PvP IV Pokemon to really focus on and get needle point with, well, the one that you can farm the most would be the one to be it, and Shadow Victreebel happens to be that. So yeah, this PvP IV Deep Dive also features insights from Jason2890, who is a front page of the leaderboard frequenter and also a staunch Shadow Victreebel enjoyer. We collaborated, turns out we're both looking for the same thing, so if, top of the leaderboard GBL guy says that these are the breakpoints we're looking for, and I'm saying that they're the breakpoints we're looking for, you might just want to stop and listen to what we got to say about Shadow Victreebel. Now, as per usual, in this guide, I'm going to be talking about the hidden true stats of a Pokemon and the associated breakpoints that can give them an advantage in Pokemon Go's PvP. If you're not too familiar with these concepts, or if at any point in this video you're starting to get confused about what I'm talking about, highly recommend checking out my PvP IVs simplified video, link up above and in the description. Basically, get your feet wet before you dive off into the deep end here. And then if you want to reference any of this information in a text-based format, or you want to ogle the PvP IV tables that feature all the IV spreads that have the stats that I talk about in this video, well, link in the description to my Shadow Victreebel PvP IV Deep Dive on GamePress, which has all that information. And without further ado, let's talk about Shadow Victreebel IVs. To start out, well, what do I mean by the most farmable Shadow Pokemon? Well, if you're unaware, one of the prime ways to get Shadow Bellsprouts to evolve into Shadow Victreebel is to fight the Rocket decoy grunts. So if you put on the Super Rocket Radar, the one that you use to search for Giovanni, you also spawn these decoy grunts that dress up like Giovanni, but when you click on them, they're like, you got bamboozled, punk. I'm not Giovanni, it's me. The person with a Shadow Bellsprout, right? And they always lead with Shadow Bellsprout. So you're nearly guaranteed to get a Shadow Bellsprout or a Shadow Weeping Bell from that encounter. Occasionally you might get a Shadow Raticate, but you can farm these Shadow Bellsprout in mass by just putting on your Super Rocket Radar, and if you do run into the actual Giovanni, just run away from him, right? Another thing to mention with this is that Giovanni, the decoy grunts, the normal grunts, and the Team Rocket admins, they all, they don't overlap. So if there's a stop that's a rocket stop, and it's just a normal grunt, the Super Rocket Radar won't override them. So you're not missing out on anything else by putting on your Super Rocket Radar. You're just adding more rockets that you could encounter to fight Shadow Pokemon. To add to that, the decoy grunts also give you Rocket Radar pieces for the admins. So if you think about it, if you're trying to farm the admins a bit more, by putting on your Super Rocket Radar, you'll just have more encounters because you'll be running into these decoy grunts, where before it would just be a normal Pokestop, nothing but a normal Pokestop. So overall, if you didn't know about this rocket tech, well, I'm happy to tell you now that this is a way that you could be doing it that you might not have been doing, that I guess a lot of people have known about for years now, but if it's your first time hearing about it, oh, it's time to put on that Super Rocket Radar. And if you already spent all of your Super Rocket Radars fighting Giovanni, maybe the next time you get one, hang on to it for a little bit and farm up them Bellsprout. So here I have all 372 swag-approved Shadow Victreebel IV spreads. And the attack stat that we're using here is 136. And I think this encompasses the majority of Shadow Victreebel's breakpoints that you might be interested in. Of course, going a little bit lower might not hurt you, and going a little bit higher could offer a little bit more consistency. So what advantages do you get by having this attack stat? Well, for one, there is the Diggersby 1-1 shield scenario, which is also technically a 1-2 shield scenario win. There's also the Bastiodon 1-1 shield scenario, which can be pretty big. There's also the Vigoroth 1-1 shield scenario, as long as you have at least 123 HP. And it's also somewhat IVs depending. If the Vigoroth is a little bit more shallow on the HP, then it'll get KO'd a little bit sooner, right? There's also the Lickitung 2-2 shield scenario, and IVs depending, possibly the 0-0 shield scenario. Against Galarian Stunfisk, this can help you also avoid the third Rock Slide in the 2-2 shield scenario, allowing you to come out with more HP to harass the next Pokemon that comes in. This is, of course, against the rank 1 Galarian Stunfisk, which has 127 defense. There are some bigger defense Galarian Stunfisk out there. And this can also enable the Venusaur 2-1 shield scenario, which is nice because, you know, rather than losing the Venusaur, you can now be beaten Venusaur, which is always a little bit better. Now, as far as having a little bit of a higher attack stat goes, personally, I think all these IVs are fantastic, and I'd be pleased as punch to have any of them, but I have a little bit of extra favoritism towards ones that have higher than 136.46 attack. With that attack stat, you'd be able to cover high defense Vigoroth. I haven't done a Vigoroth PvP IV deep dive yet, but I have noticed that like the 0-15-10 does have a notably better performance than, you know, the rank 1 Vigoroth does. So in general, I find that higher defense Vigoroth are better performing Vigoroth, and having a little bit higher attack makes that matchup a bit more consistent. And then there's also higher defense Galarian Stunfisk. The rank 1 only has 127 defense, and if you checked out my Galarian Stunfisk PvP IV deep dive, link above and in the description, of course, if you want to check that out, the recommendation is to use the rank 1, 2, or 3. And if you don't have either of those 3 Galarian Stunfisk, to just make sure that you have higher defense than the rank 1 Galarian Stunfisk, because a lot of things are going to be chasing that defense stat. Other Galarian Stunfisk chase that defense stat to try to get an attack break point. So if you've got higher defense than the, you know, established grade minimum, which would be the rank 1 with the 127, that's like the thing you want to do. So even independently of my swag tips here and people following the gospel of the swag man, the general idea is you want to have higher defense than the rank 1 Galarian Stunfisk if you don't have the rank 1 Galarian Stunfisk, right? So preparing for 127.7, which is a defense stat of the rank 2 Galarian Stunfisk, and is a defense range that a lot of Galarian Stunfisk happen to fall in. You know, if you want to do that job more consistently, then you got to make sure you got the 136.46 defense stat. And it might sound a little pedantic here, but you can see here the rank 114 only has 136.45 attack, right? Not 0.46. And does that really matter? Well, if you're up against a Galarian Stunfisk that has 127.7 defense, you're not going to get the break points. So you might want to look a little bit further down the list and check out the rank 127 with the 136.63. Now, if you're hearing this and you're like, Ryan Swag, then why do you have it at 136? We should have it at 136.46. Well, you can always customize the table and change that to 136.46. And then boom, now you trim the list down to the 287 options that have that attack standard. I do think that the 136 is perfectly a-okay. But I do like that higher level of attack for the consistency here. And this is what I'd personally be gunning for, you know, above the 136. But you do miss out on some bulk there. You do miss out on some bulk. And if you are looking even higher for the attack weight, you will notice that there is an attack break point on the Frostlass if you have greater than 137 attack. Thing is with that is that if you swap immediately into a safe swap Frostlass, right, you can still overcome it, right? What the breakpoint does, it gives you an extra turn of wiggle room against the Frostlass, where if it got 2 Powdered Snows in before you brought in Victreebel for the counter swap, you'd still be able to subdue it the same way, where before you'd have to like swap in basically immediately. So if you're a little bit slower on the swap, or you want to have a little bit more wiggle room against the Frostlass, then having greater than 137 attack would be recommended. But to add to that as well, if you checked out my Frostlass PvP IV deep dive, link up above and in the description, Frostlass is mostly concerned with its attack stat and its HP stat, so having a little bit lower than 137 attack could still confer you some benefits against the Frostlass, because if they're thrifting on the D, then you're able to thrift on the attack. But if that is a job that you're very concerned about and that you do want to do consistently, then I'd try to make sure you have above 137 attack. So my recommendation there is, you know, if you do get 137 attack stat one or higher than that, maybe not build it right away. You know, put a star on it, frustration TM it when the time comes around, but only take it out and build it if you really do want that extra consistency against a Frostlass there. But aside from that, I'd probably stick for the ones that are in this kind of attack range, and then hugging the bulk a little bit more. Then when it comes to Shadow Victreebel's HP stat, we're looking at 128 as a minimum. If you do want to thrift lower than that, 122 HP is required for the Bastiodon 1-1 shield scenario, roughly 123 IVs depending and debuffs depending, of course, can get you the Registeel 1-1 shield scenario. And then against Lickitung, 126 IV depending, of course, because the Lickitung has a bit more of an attack weight than you're expecting, right? It could still get you. 126 HP can do it. We're anticipating 2 charge moves there, so 128 would do the job a little bit more consistently, depending on the Lickitung's attack stat and your defense stat. And then 130 HP would be the most consistent for expected Lickitung in that situation. 127 HP can get you the Umbreon 2-2 shield scenario. 131 HP would make it more consistent, though, if they landed the Last Resort. Not a lot of Umbreon are thinking about the Last Resort for that extra baby bit of damage. In the Victreebel situation, they're probably going to be going straight Foul Play. But if you do want that extra level of consistency, 131 HP can offer that. And then the hard check for the 128 HP would be for the Toxapex 2-1 shield scenario. So you spend 2 shields, they spend 1 shield. If you do find yourself up against the wall against the Toxapex, and you really don't want your opponent to get swapped, having that 128 HP can go a long way. Now, there are some higher HP checks. For example, the Lickitung consistency with the 130 and the Umbreon consistency with the 131. Even higher ones could be 132 for the Powdered Snow Alolan Ninetales 2-1 shield scenario. These days, we see a lot of shadow variants more so than the regular ones, so how often are you going to run into that? It's a little bit questionable. And then there's also 134 HP for Registeel 2-2 shield scenario potential, where to meet the attack break point and to get that super high level of HP, I mean, if you check out the list here, there's only one that's doing it, the rank 118 with 136.12 attacks, so... And then this is also kind of like debuff depending too, so it's not exactly the most consistent thing on the planet. It's just one of those things where if you do happen to come across a Shadow Victreebel that does have the 134 or higher HP, you know, start, keep it in the bag, maybe do some simulations on pvpoke.com and see how likely that 2-2 play is against the Registeel and what you can do to meet that. But if you're failing it, I wouldn't be terribly surprised because it can be a little bit IV dependent both ways. So to kind of wrap that up neat into a little bow here, I think 128 HP, perfectly okay. You can thrift down to about 126 and not be too bad, but 128 feels like a very nice, happy safety zone. 130 HP is a little bit safer, and then after that, I wouldn't say it's exactly a goal, but, you know, the extra gravy that you get if you get even higher HP on your Shadow Victreebel. And then when it comes to the defense stat, there really wasn't a whole lot of, like, important defense breakpoints that I came across. 90 defense was just kind of like a safe minimum that I noticed that kept the HP checks consistent. So you could go a little bit lower than the 90 defense and not get burned too badly. But the closer you get to 88 defense, the more likely it is for your HP checks to start to fail you because you're going to be taking extra charge move damage. So if you are, you know, flying lower than 90 defense or, you know, lower than 89 defense even, I'd make sure to like double check those matchups on pvpoke.com because you might be flying a little bit too close to the sun. And what I did notice is that once you start to hit 88 defense, then the HP checks get to be really goofy. So I just kind of keep that in mind. And then once again, this table is customizable. So if you're like, yeah, I don't want that, I want the 136.46, and we'll fly a little close to the sun here. We'll go 88.4, and then, oh shoot, and then 130 HP seemed a little bit nicer. And now you got your own little custom table looking for the IV spreads that you find to be most relevant here. Which, you know, would be the rank 127, 132 HP. You got the attack stat. And if you want to have the bigger HP stat, well, now you got a couple more options because you're thrifting on the defense. Just make sure to double check these matchups to make sure you're not flying a little bit too close to the sun. Now, this is all fine and dandy, Mr. Swag, but like, I already built like the rank 30 Shadow Victreebel. I don't really want to build another Shadow Victreebel. And in all honesty, you really don't have to. When I collaborated with Jason2890 on this guide here, he didn't have the swag IVs right away. It just so happened that he was looking for them, and it was like a coincidence that I, approached him about the situation, because he's like, hey, that's like exactly what I'm looking for, right? But like, he's top of the leaderboard, front page in it consistently, and for the longest time, he didn't have the Swag IV Victreebel. He was using some scrub, unswagged, filthy Shadow Victreebel. So you don't need to have these super premium IVs to get the basic job for Shadow Victreebel done. And you could keep going with the one that you already have built and probably not notice anything of it. But if you do notice that you are losing those matchups that I talked about, or maybe you do want to have that extra bit of tech in those matchups, make things a little bit more, consistent, then it could be worthwhile to keep your eyes peeled for these IVs. Maybe not build it right away, but put a star on it. Save it for the rainy day where you feel like you need it, and then build it then. But for the most part, Shadow Victreebel is Shadow Victreebel, so you don't have to get too complicated with it. But if you haven't built one yet, I'd probably build one of the ones I highlighted in this guide here. And yeah, if you're a Shadow Victreebel enjoyer and you don't have one that I highlighted in this video, I'll keep your eyes peeled, because you might enjoy Shadow Victreebel a little bit more if you happen to get those stat checks. So that's all I gotta say right now about Shadow Victreebel. If you got any questions on this content, of course, comment below, let me know what's up, and I'll be happy to help you out. And if you enjoyed this kind of content and you want to see more like it, well, make sure to subscribe to SwagTips. SwagTips. I'd also like to give a special shout out to these Patreon supporters. If you want to support Swagman on Patreon, link in the description. I was actually collaborating a little bit with Jason. I don't know what numbers come after his name, but he's on the top of the leaderboard all the time. You know the guy. Yep. He's got the MS Paint picture. And so he was telling me some Dugong tech. We were swapping some strategies, and I was like, I think I can make Dugong work here. Let's see how it goes.